Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to my channel, Kalanati. Today I'm going to talk about two related short story anthologies from 12th Planet Press. The first one is Defying Doomsday, edited by Sana Delichva and Holly Kench, and this came out in 2016. Its a follow-up, sister anthology is Rebuilding Tomorrow. This one was edited by Sana Delichva and it came out in 2020. Both of these were crowdsourced and I backed the Kickstarter for Rebuilding Tomorrow, and then I went back and got Defying Doomsday when I realized that that was kind of a sequel anthology. I finally read both of these in September. I buddy read them with my friend Seanan from That's So Poe. We had a great time. I really enjoyed being able to exchange thoughts with her on every single one of the stories, and it's good to have the discussion, especially for short stories where it's very easy to just blitz through a whole bunch of them and maybe not give them as much individual attention. So it was a great experience. We had some really good conversations. Now, the number one thing about these anthologies that made me interested in them and that I would highly recommend them for is that they focus on characters with disabilities. These anthologies are intended thematically to show that people with disabilities, chronic health conditions, etc., are just as able to survive, just as worthy of surviving in an apocalypse, and then just as capable of helping to rebuild and to reshape the world after a disaster, and perhaps to create an even better world and society that is, I guess, better suited for everybody, not just able-bodied people. I really appreciated these themes, and I thought that they elevated the stories and the anthologies from just being more run-of-the-mill dystopian stories. I'm not actually very big into the dystopian genre in the first place. I don't think I would have been interested in these stories if it hadn't had a twist on them, which made them really good food for thought. So I'm going to give you a rundown of some of my favorite stories from both of these anthologies, beginning with Defying Doomsday. These are the stories that are about, the apocalypse is happening now and how do we survive. They're not necessarily about the after effects. That's in the second anthology. So diving into Defying Doomsday, the first one that I really enjoyed is Something in the Rain by Seanan Mcguire. This surprised me a little bit. I'm a little bit hit or miss with Seanan Mcguire's work, but this story is about a neurodivergent teenager, I think she's a teenager, who has survived when most other people have not, when there's this toxic people-eating thing in the rain. So you can never be outside in the rain and you can never come into contact with water. And then somebody comes into her life who isn't very nice to her, and it's kind of a revenge story in a way. It left me with those very satisfying revenge feelings. Maybe not the intention, but I liked it. This is also a really good example of a story where the thing that makes the main character different from the rest of society is the thing that helps her to survive when other people haven't, and I liked that. Then there is Tansy Rayner Roberts' story, Did We Break the End of the World? This felt very YA. In fact, I will go ahead and say that Defying Doomsday overall had a very YA feel to it. Not all the stories are about teenagers, but many of them are, and I came away thinking it was a YA collection. Did We Break the End of the World is also about teenagers who live in this world where they've been pretty much abandoned by robot mothers and left to fend for themselves, and a group of them who have developed their own skills at surviving and might uncover what really happened to their world. I liked it. I found it amusing and I really enjoyed Robert's style. I find there's kind of this lightheartedness and humor to her work that I've really enjoyed in the past. Then there is John Chu's story, Selected After Images of the Fading. It really stands out in this collection because it is a story about an adult. It's about a man rather than a woman or a young girl. And the man in the story, the main character, he has body dysmorphia or muscular dysmorphia, and it's a world where reality is fading away unless a certain amount of attention is paid to the elements, and he is fading away because he doesn't see himself, or he doesn't want to look at himself and bring himself back, and then he finds somebody who does see him as he really is. And it just, this whole topic that I was engaging with, how you perceive yourself, dysmorphia, it was really unusual. I've never seen this talked about in a speculative story before, and I really came away appreciating that element of it. Then my absolute favorite, I think this is probably Shannon's favorite when we were buddy reading this, Portobello Blind by Octavia Cade. This is about a blind teenage girl who is left alone when I think basically a flu pandemic kills most of the world, and she has to survive blind and decides that she wants to behave like a scientist. It's also about like doing science and doing this thing that you love even when the rest of the world has changed and it might not seem like there's a point to it. But I really love this. It was so well written, and there were a couple of things said in it which really reminded me of how I have felt or how other people have felt during the pandemic we're all living through, like wanting to be around people but not wanting to rush re-entry into social situations. I was like, I feel that. So this was, for me, by far the best story in this collection and really worth getting your hands on it to read this one story. And then there is No Shit by KL Evangelista. This is about a woman with Crohn's disease, and she meets up with another guy who survived after another like pandemic, and they kind of go on the road with a radio show trying to find other survivors, and it was funny and a little bit vulgar and really good. And then the last one I want to mention, because even though it wasn't my favorite, the follow-up story to it in the next anthology was one of my favorites. So I Will Remember You by Janet Edwards. This is a story about kind of an alien invasion where aliens appear and then they cull the human population over 13 days. People die, and they're all marked by a number of blue dots on their hand, and the number of dots is the day that you're going to die. And the main character is a teenager who doesn't have a hand, so she doesn't know how many dots that she has, but she assumes she's going to die on the same day as her parents, only she doesn't, and there's a reason for that. I did not love the beginning of this story, but the situation that it's set up for the follow-up story in Rebuilding Tomorrow, I really enjoyed, so I wanted to mention that as well. So now we move on to Rebuilding Tomorrow, and like I said, there are sequel stories in this. Not all the stories are sequels. Some of them are by authors who did not have stories in Defying Doomsday. But it's a really interesting mix, and this one is more on many years after the disaster, how has the world changed and what is the role of people with disabilities in that? What kind of communities have they shaped for themselves? And this is the one I really wanted to get to. I found the theme of it, the point of this anthology, to just be kind of like the inspiring thing I wanted to read. And I think that this one had some stories that didn't quite meet my expectations for the theme. Some of the stories in this were a lot darker than I thought they should have been for something that was supposed to be hopeful and inspirational. But on the whole, I think that this was a bit of a stronger one, and I enjoyed it overall more than Defying Doomsday. But there isn't that much of a difference between them. So from this one, I Will Lead My People by Janet Edwards. This is the sequel to the last story in the previous anthology. And it's like 25 years later, and I love this one because the main character is now a grown woman with her own family, her own community, and she has become a leader. Like, she is the person in charge, and this defies the expectations of people who do not know her or her community very well because they're sexist or whatever. And a man from a different community that had survived appears. He clearly wants to like take over her community, but she is in a much stronger position, and she basically goes into this interaction with him being like, you have no chance in hell of taking over my community, and I'm going to prove to everybody who's following you that they would be much better off dumping your ass and coming with me. And I really enjoyed it. Perhaps because it was kind of competent people being competent, and I really love that. And this really surprised me because I thought the first story was interesting, but I didn't jive with some elements of it. But this sequel was good. And then after that, there is Mary Shitmas by KL Evangelista, the follow-up to No Shit. And once again, it was funny and just highly entertaining. And I think I got a better feel for some of the characters as well, and yeah, it was good. Then one of the stories that I was looking forward to and did not disappoint, O Marino by Andy C. Buchanan. I've really enjoyed some of their fiction recently. I had high expectations for this one, and it was good. I think it was one that did a great job of engaging with the idea of how people can create communities that serve their needs better to break out of the mold of what was done before. It was a little bit bittersweet, but I thought there were some really good ideas and realistic human behavior packed into the story. The Science of Pacific Apocalypse by Octavia Cade is the follow-up to Portobello Blind. It is 10 years later and is mostly in an audio format, as people have created a like radio scientific journal, because there are all these like scientists who have survived the apocalypse by being very isolated. They all communicate via radio, and they have like this radio show, which is their scientific journal. And it's kind of their retrospective issue where they're talking about how the journal came to be and how it brought them together and what they want to do next with it and make it more inclusive. It's also really about like melding scientific pursuits and passion and research with more of the arts, and I love this idea. Octavia Cade is a science communicator, and what she wants to talk about with the story was completely up my alley. I also want to mention A Floating World of Iron Spines by Tian Priss. I don't think that this author has any other published work out there, but I was impressed by this story, and it stands out because it's kind of a drowned world scenario. Like, people are floating, like they have floating cities and go everywhere by boat and stuff, and I liked that. It's also kind of like aliens came and changed our world, but now we're friends with them, or things are peaceful now. There was also a relationship in this which was a very close, intimate relationship, but not a romantic or sexual one, and I love that representation. And then the last one I want to mention from Rebuilding Tomorrow is Nothing But Flowers by Katherine Duckett. This is one of the longer pieces in this anthology, and another one of my favorites. Once again, I had high expectations because I've really enjoyed other short stories by Katherine Duckett in the past, and it was very good, and also very much about people who have created their own community that better serves their needs, and then having to defend that against people who want to sweep in and take everything from them because, I don't know, white rich patriarchy. I had a good ending that I really needed, and it was one of the more hopeful and uplifting of the stories that I thought really went with the theme of the overall anthology. So those are my favorite stories from both of these anthologies, and I hope that that gives you a little bit of a sense of what the stories and the variety of them are like. Ultimately, I would say that Rebuilding Tomorrow is my favorite of these two because it is less dystopian and more looking towards the future and that very hopeful rebuilding theme, and there are just quite a few really strong stories in this. I think you could read this on its own, even though there are sequel stories in this. They definitely stand on their own and provide context and have, you know, standalone plots. But if you were interested in these anthologies, I would recommend reading both of them back to back and having the full context and the full range of stories. It's definitely worth it. If you have read either of these anthologies or any of the stories from them, please let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching as always, and I'll be back to talk to you again soon. And until then, bye.